Hi, I'm Brian Schroff with Beyondware. Welcome to part 2 of the video tutorial series for Beyond Typicals 2. In this episode, I'll give you a tour of the user interface. I'll show you navigation and camera options, show you some preset example projects already in the software. I'll show you some environmental settings, including traffic and lighting. I'll show you how to save and load your project, and more. Let's dive in. When you load Beyond Typicals 2, the first thing you'll see is this Getting Started page. You see we have a link to our website at the top, some information on navigation here on the left, and this big box here is an overall tour of the user interface, showing you some of the key components of the software, which I will dive into more in our tutorial series. You can get rid of this by pressing close in the top right. If you ever wanted to get that back, you can go to the Help menu, and Getting Started is right here at the top. That brings that right back. Our Help menu also has some helpful links to our product website. There's some links to get started, some tutorial videos. This shows what version you're running, and also a link to sign up and remove your watermarks if you're running a free trial. You can also find more information about your license and packages we provide. Here's a place to activate your license, which brings up a window to type in your subscription key. That'll check and make sure you're signed up and ready to go. You can also see your subscription information. You can see that I'm a Beyond Typicals Pro user with a yearly subscription and 360 days until my renewal. You can also log out from your license as well. Navigation is pretty intuitive. We use the right mouse button to click and drag. That will allow us to rotate the camera around the model. Clicking and dragging the middle mouse button will allow you to pan the camera left, right, up, and down. Scrolling the middle mouse wheel will help you zoom in with a scroll upward and zoom out with a scroll back. If you wanted to speed up your zoom, you can hold Control and scroll in and out. That kind of zooms in and out a little bit faster. Using the left mouse button is generally our selection button, so we can go ahead and click on different section components. If you do a click and drag, you can see a little timer that will then allow you, if you keep holding, to move those section components within the typical section. You can left click to place again. The camera controls are in the lower left hand of the screen. You can see there's a number of different options to view your model. We're currently set to free, which holds the camera still and lets you pan and zoom and rotate as you like to work or export an image to your liking. You can also set an orbit that will automatically orbit your model. You can change the distance, change the angle of the orbit, and the orbit speed. You can see we can go negative and change the direction there. There's also a pan feature. It does something similar. It will automatically start panning in a direction. You can go right, left, up, down, back, and forward. You can see I'm also in the world relative transform, so all those camera pans are with respect to the front edge of the model. If I were to change that to camera, you can see the camera then just begins moving right, up, down, left, forward, and back. And again, this has a spin bar to change the panning speed as you find appropriate. These spin bars are pretty common through Beyond Typicals. You can either click and drag the line, click some of the arrows on the outsides, or you can manually put in your own value. The camera also has a 2D option. You can click this top right button here to toggle orthographic to view your model in 2 dimensions. You can look at the top, front, left, and right sides of the model. And you can use the camera pan similar to a 3D model. The last camera setting I'll discuss here is field of view. You can see this is another slider bar to change how wide or narrow your lens is of your camera. I generally find that a wider field of view is more appropriate kind of at a person level within the model, and a narrower field of view Does a better job capturing the model as a whole from a more zoomed out camera. Feel free to play around with it to see what works best for you. One final note on cameras. Beyond Typicals 2 has a camera save function here in the render section on the right. You can see there's a button at the top to save your current camera. By clicking that, it will capture where your camera was in which 2D or 3D mode. So you can save multiple cameras between them. You can see I'll switch to 2D, do a top view, save current camera. That allows me to bounce back and forth to camera positions that I had saved previously. I'll go ahead and give you a brief overview of the user interface of Beyond Typicals. Up here in the top left corner is our main menu, which you can make appear or disappear by clicking that Beyond Typicals logo. We've got our file menu to start a new project or save the work you're doing or load another project that you've worked on already. We have an edit menu, which can pull up a history of the changes you've made to this project in this working session, plus an undo and redo tool. We've also got our license and help menus that we touched on earlier. In the lower left-hand corner is our camera settings. That'll stay up as you're working in Beyond Typicals. If you select a section, it will pull up the section dialog on the left side here. That'll allow you to make some changes, add some assets, or do other cool features to the individual sections. There's a lot of functionality here, which we'll cover in later videos. When you click away from a section, it'll deselect and that dialog box will go away. On the right is our toolbar. There is a lot of functionality here that we can get into more detail in later videos, but I'll give you a brief rundown of what's contained here. At the top, we've got our sections menu. This is a list of all the elements that you can pull into your typical section. Beneath that, we've got example projects. This is a great starting point for your project, whether you want to start with a blank model or go and find something similar to what you're trying to build. Also, we do a lot of work to show off all the different functionality of Beyond Typicals by building these example projects. So I recommend you dive in and see all the different things you can do, whether it's changing labels or place assets or use our free pipe or water features. They're all really cool things built into those example projects. Next is our asset menu. These are all 3D elements that can be brought into your model in some fashion. We can show you how to do those later. Next is our section hierarchy. This is a functional list, top to bottom, of all the elements in your model as they appear left to right. Beneath that is the rendering menu. This is where you can save your camera and revert to those presets that I showed you earlier. You can also use this menu to export your model to a screenshot or animated video. Then we have our environment menu. This allows you to change some of the display options behind or above your model, whether it's changing the sun time of day and rotation, or whether you can turn the clouds on and off or change some of the gradient background colors. All of that's built into the environment menu. We've got our settings menu, which has some additional display features like disabling section labels or pausing or disabling traffic. All that's built into our settings. There's some other features like changing the section length here as well. Then we get into our pro features for those subscribers. We have some scene effects to add kind of an artistic flair to your model. We have our phasing menu, which is a great way to show multiple typical sections in a single BTIP file. And then we've also got our layout mode, which is a really cool way to show multiple phases as well. Down here at the bottom of the toolbar, we have our history menu. This is, as you can see, as I've been making changes, a tracked list of those changes to the active working session. You are able to go and undo back to points in the model by clicking at that point in the tracked history, and you can go ahead and redo by clicking to where you want in that list as well. There's a number of other ways to do undo, redo. You can see down here on this button, we have an undo button and redo button appear as those functions are available. Also up in the edit menu, we can do undo and redo as well. And there's also a keyboard shortcut. You can use Control Z to undo and Control R to redo. Lastly, in the toolbar, we have our traffic play pause button. You can see by toggling that, we can pause traffic in place. We also have our simulation on off button that will either display or turn off the moving traffic through your model. When you right-click a section, our quick action menu pops up, which will show you a few different ways to manipulate that section. It includes removing or duplicating the section, surrounding it with striping, or flipping that section, and some other navigation tips here. So I'll show you that right now, that I can remove a section by either left-clicking here on this quick action or pressing delete on my keyboard. And I can undo that with Control Z, as I discussed earlier. I can also duplicate a section by selecting that option in the quick action menu or pressing Control D on the keyboard. You can also see I can surround a section with striping if it doesn't have any by pressing S or selecting this. So you can see that already had striping down the left side, and by selecting that surround with striping option, we've got a stripe there. I can also do that on this by pressing S on my keyboard to show that by default white skip dash line down the side of the section. You can also change which section you are selecting by pressing Tab or right on your keyboard. You can go to the left by pressing Shift Tab or the left arrow on your keyboard. If for any reason you get turned around and you're looking at the back of your model, pressing right will continue to move left, so it's relative to the front edge of your model. Pressing left will go right. That'll just help you orient yourself with what is the front or back of your model. Another option here is a wrap with folder option. That is a reference to our section hierarchy, which I will show you in a future video. It's more of an organizational tool to use and group multiple sections at one time. And then finally, in our quick actions, we have flip. So you can see by pressing F or choosing that quick action menu that you can flip the traffic or pedestrian movement on a sidewalk. That works for bike lanes as well. And for asymmetrical sections like curb and gutter or retaining walls, that flip will also flip the element in the section as well. So let's take a look at the example projects in Beyond Typicals 2. Obviously, the blank example project is a great starting point to start from scratch. I will note that when you open one of these example projects, to be sure to save the work you're doing if you don't want to lose it in your active model. Opening one of these example projects will open a new file and close out of what you're working with. So that's why we get this screen to warn you to make sure your unsaved changes aren't getting lost. The two-way left turn example project you can see here is labeled as the default when you open the program. I will point out that if you were to click on the name of any of these example projects, you'll see it will take you to a YouTube video where Sam's done a great job of describing these in a little more detail. So I won't bother going into too much detail here. We use a wide variety of sections and 3D assets in all of these. We'll show you different ways to label your sections. We use different camera views. Some use multiple phases for our pro users. So we'll continue to build this list as we improve Beyond Typicals to show off any new assets that we bring in or any new functionality that would be added in future updates. So we encourage you to really dive into these and take a look around, get familiar with what Beyond Typicals can do for you. So let's take a look at the environment settings in our toolbar. You can get there by clicking this sun icon on the right. We can use these environment settings to do a couple cool things to change how your model appears. So we can turn on or off the gradient background. We can turn on or off clouds in the sky. We can use these inner and outer gradient colors to change the background color of your model. In a lot of our example projects, including our blank and default, we use this natural light blue sky, but you can see we can make some changes to those to draw some attention to your models or really set them apart using some colors that pop or maybe match a certain branding for your project. We also have the ability to play with the sun. If you see when I go to this downtown one-way example project where we've got some really tall buildings on both sides, you can see those buildings are casting a shadow on the section. We can move this time of day from, this is a 24-hour clock, so from 24 or midnight all the way down to 0, also midnight. So we've got some morning hours, midday, afternoon, and evening. You can see it's pretty dark at the nighttime hours. We are potentially adding some emissive lights to Beyond Typicals in the future, so you might be able to see your section in a nighttime environment with some street lights turned on. But I'll set this to mid-afternoon, and you can see you can also change the rotation of the sun. So this is a 360-degree spin bar. I can spin that sun around. You can see what it's doing to the shadows on the street, as well as changing the sun intensity. So if you really want that sun shining bright, you can crank that up on the spin bar or knock it down. One other note on emissive lights, we do have some 3D assets in Beyond Typicals that do emit light. Right now, that just consists of our RRFB lights with some flashing beacons on them. The rotation of the sun and intensity can really help show off these flashing beacons. When you get that sun behind it, you can see that if you're cutting a video, those flashing beacons can really pop when the sun's at the right angle. There are a number of global settings that you can adjust that will change overall components of your section. You can get to that menu in the gear icon on the right of the toolbar. At the top, we've got some visibility settings, so you can see we can enable or disable clipping of the vehicles as they move through the segment. When that's turned off, you can see the vehicles will just appear or disappear at the ends, and when that's turned on, they're clipped by an invisible plane. We can globally turn off our section labels. That will override any of your individual section label modifications, where you can turn those off individually if you prefer. This will override that and turn all of those off. We can also have these section labels cast a shadow by turning that on. You can see it'll treat those as 3D elements and cast a shadow onto the section. And finally, we can show the frames per second rate that we're clocking as we're using the program. Moving on to traffic, we've got a few options that will globally adjust our traffic moving through. First, we can pause the traffic. That's the same as pressing this traffic play pause button in the bottom of the toolbar. And we can also disable traffic, and that is the same as the simulation on off. So that'll turn off all the vehicles and bikes and pedestrians moving through the simulation. I'll skip override stop signs and override show stop bars for now. That's more of an advanced traffic feature that we'll get into in a later video. You can see we've got a traffic speed multiplier if you want to speed things up or put it into a slow motion below the value of 1. We can also globally assign speeds to every lane of traffic in your simulation. So if we wanted everything to move at 55 miles an hour, we can crank that up and press apply to all. Similarly, if we wanted to slow that down, we can do the same. You can see that adjusts the speed in each section to that speed as well. We can also similarly adjust the volume setting for each of those lanes. So if we go ahead and crank the volume up to 40%, we'll be adjusting the volume in each of those sections. We can slide that volume up to 100 to show full capacity, or bring it down to 0 to show no traffic. I'll go ahead and reset that to 1. We can also globally adjust all the traffic that's flowing through our simulation. So for instance, in this highway scenario where we might not want to see sport bikes and scooters and city buses, we can go ahead and have those toggled off and then set global traffic all. What that does in each of these individual sections is toggle this on. So this, instead of using individual traffic assignments for that section, this will defer back to the global traffic settings that you're selecting here. If we set that to none, we will then control our traffic based on the individual section traffic population. We have some similar traffic settings for pedestrian traffic. So we can go ahead and bring in some sidewalks to see that, and I will crank up the volume so we can see that in action. So we can adjust the gender distribution of people moving through the model. We can use this slider to show more men or more women, where a 0.5 value is an equal distribution of both. We can also adjust the ethnicity distribution if you're trying to match a certain demographic. For instance, if your project is in a predominantly black neighborhood, you can adjust those sliders to represent that. You can click Refresh Traffic to instantly reset all the traffic in your model to match your input parameters. I'm going to skip intersection timings for now. Again, that's a more detailed traffic setting that we'll cover in a later video. We have the ability to adjust the section length. So you can see we're at 100 feet. We can bump that up to 500 feet and also knock that down to as little as 10 feet. I'll note that any section length less than 50 feet will not have vehicles moving through it. What you're seeing flow through here are vehicles that were already populated in the simulation based on that 500-foot length, but now that you can see after a bit of time, we're not getting any traffic moving through there. So anything less than 50 feet, traffic will be turned off, and once you get to 50 feet, we'll start seeing traffic flow through there again. The section alignment settings offer some nice features for our designers as they're building their section. First, we can turn on a center line by toggling off this Hide Center Line button. The centerline alignment adjustment here is set to 0, which means the centerline is going to show up in the mathematical middle of the built section. So here we've got a 150-foot wide section, and that centerline is bisecting the middle of that symmetrical section. If we were to make this asymmetrical and add a lane on one side, you can see that center line has moved to the right. So if we wanted to manually bring that back to the center, that's what this adjustment is for. So I'm going to type in -6, which is half of that lane width, to get right back to the middle of the ditch. Next, we'll talk lock outer sections. This is another really useful feature to help designers design to a set width. What this does is take your rightmost and leftmost sections in your model and lock them into a place that is a distance from the center line. So what that just did when I toggled this on was take this fill slope and this fill slope and put them 70 feet left and right of the center line. We can adjust those positions by typing different values in here. So moving that right section to 80 pushes that out and creates that gap, which we can fill up with other elements. By toggling that lock outer section off, those pieces will snap back into place. This is really useful if you wanted to build a right-of-way line and lock those into a certain place while you're designing alternatives on a set right-of-way width. This is particularly useful when you bring in your right-of-way elements and set them to a width of 0. That way those lines are not adding any extra width to your total section. So you can see when I go and lock the outer sections at a set distance of -75 and +75, my total width remains 150, and those lines are 0 width locked into place. So if I were to delete other sections, those lines will remain at 150-foot width. Next, we have width bounds. This is another way to show the total width of your section. When we toggle this on, you'll see that we have a width bound pre-populated at 100 feet. What this is going to do is take everything that touches that 100 feet and out and highlight it red when we have this visualizer shown. If we turn that visualizer off, you can see that width bound label will stay, but that red highlight can be turned off. This width bound is a value that you can enter in yourself, so we can go ahead and adjust that here. That width bound label can also be adjusted by changing the height. It can also be brought below the section with a negative value. We can also override that text. So if we don't want that to say width bounds, we want it to say something like right of way. We offer that override here. And then another way of showing the total width of your section is this final setting here, where when we toggle this on, it will show a total width of all your built elements. So there's a little bit less customization here. This is intended to just total up all of your elements. And if you've got a 50-foot wide building or waterfront, it's going to add that to that list. This label is also movable, so we can bring that up above our section. We can override that text too. Instead of saying total width, we can say something like project limits. And that dimension, we can also edit if we need to be something else. For our pro users, we have these really cool scene effects that apply an artistic overlay to your model. This could be useful for a proposal or newsletters or something else you'd like eye-catching for your project. We have a blueprint scene effect here. We can adjust the line opacity of those white lines on the blueprint paper. We can adjust the opacity of the paper. We can play with the scale of that blueprint paper and change the width of those white lines as well. We have a crosshatch scene effect, which applies a black and white hatch over the top of your model. You can adjust the opacity here, as well as the hatch size on those black and white lines. We also have this ballpoint pen scene effect, which shows your model drawn on a spiral notebook. We can adjust the line opacity and the paper opacity here as well. We can also play with the paper scale to show a different size notebook and also adjust the line widths here. Another really great tool for our pro users is phasing. This menu allows you to create and store and navigate between multiple typical section models in a single Beyond Typicals file. This is really useful for planning workshop meetings or meetings with the public to show alternatives for a concept or construction staging or multiple typical sections along an alignment. We've got some example projects that we can show off some of those features, but first I'll show you how this works. So under our phasing menu, we can create a new phase. You can see we've already got a couple here, but if I create a new phase, it adds it to the bottom of the list as a blank model. If you want to use an existing phase and duplicate it, we have that option as well. So I've got this existing concrete median phase. I'll go ahead and press duplicate current phase. It adds it to the bottom of the list and we can rename it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new phase called left turn lane. If I want to delete a phase, so this blank model I created, I can go ahead and press this button here at the bottom. And I can also take this left turn lane model and move it up or down in the phasing list. So let's go ahead and make a left turn lane option. I will remove this concrete median, duplicate a lane, change its width, and add some striping. So there we have a left turn lane phase as well, in addition to a shared use path option, a grass median option, and our existing conditions. A really nice way to navigate between these phases is this display floating phases button here, which brings up some floating buttons at the bottom of your screen. That way you can navigate away from the phasing menu and still be able to toggle between those phases. Another really cool way to navigate between these phases is this display auto phase setting, where you can add a certain interval in numbers of seconds to automatically toggle between those or cycle between those phases. This works when you're in an orbit camera or a pan camera. You can see this could be useful for maybe exporting a video that cycles through all the phases in your project. You can go ahead and press stop and turn that off if you choose. can also display the phase header at the top of your screen, so it adds that floating label right there at the top for the name of your phase. This Beachfront Alternatives example project is a good example of using phasing to show multiple concepts for a project. But we can also use phasing to our advantage to show construction phasing. So in our highway widening example project, you can see we have an existing condition and a lot of phases to walk you through the construction of the north half of the road and then the south half of the road all the way to final. You can see we're also using some of our section highlight features to call attention to what's open and what's closed in those work zones. We can also show something like multiple typical sections for an alignment. So our example project called freeway alignment uses phases to show what the typical section would look like at different stationing along your alignment. So that's just another cool way to use phasing to your advantage on your project. Our layout mode is another unique way to show off your project for our pro users. We can get there by going to the layout mode menu in our toolbar and enter layout mode with this button at the top. We can then create a new layout and select the layout we've created to add our phasing to a single view. You can see here we've brought in all 4 of those phases in our project and they are stacked on top of each other. So that's the vertical layout orientation. We can also change this to horizontal. You can see it'll stack them in series in front. And if we wanted to change that, so 100's in front, we can manipulate that order with these arrows down here at the bottom. You can see they're all a little bit close together, so we can change the spacing of the layout by typing in a new value in that spin bar. We can turn our labels on and off. We can adjust the label position up and down. We can change our label size. There's font settings to change those. We can also include label occlusion or turn that off. I'll show you what that means. Right now our labels are hovering above our section, but if we were to bring those down, you can see those are getting hidden by the actual model. If we turn label occlusion off, those will hover over the top of those models. You can see we've got face camera for that label toggled on, so you can see those station labels continue to face the camera. When we toggle that off, those will align with the typical section. We can give our layout a name, create a unique name for this layout. In case we wanted to add another layout, we can do the same thing. Layout 2, maybe show these in vertical this time. When we're in layout mode, we're locked from making edits to our sections. So you can see those toolbar items are grayed out. We can still render images or videos of the layout mode. We can change the environment. You can see we can change the time of day and sun rotation. When we zoom out enough, you can see those shadows go away. You can also use some of the visibility settings for your layout mode. We can turn clipping on and off. We can disable our sections. Some of these other settings that would change your model aren't active, so I can try to change my length to 290. You see while I'm in layout mode, that change does not take place. But if I do exit layout mode, it has increased those sections to 290 feet. When I go back to layout mode and load up those layouts, you can see those will update accordingly. So some of the changes you might make to your settings in layout mode, you might need to exit layout mode and come back in to see those take effect. We can also use our scene effects for our pro users to make those changes to our layout modes. Can pause traffic or turn it off. It's just another really unique way to show off your project. To save your work, you can press Control S on your keyboard or go to File Save in the main menu. If you haven't saved your work yet, it'll prompt you to add in a file name, so I'll write test1. I'll make some changes here to this version and press Control S, and you'll see I get a Save Successful message in the top. I can go ahead and save a copy. So going to File, Save As, I can call this Test2, and make a couple more changes, and save that project. If I want to open or load a project, I can press Control O on my keyboard or go to File, Load in the main menu. I can go back and load that Test1. Saving multiple files for a project will be helpful for our light users that don't have access to the phasing menu to create multiple models in a single file. So if you need to bounce around between several alternatives or construction sequencing, you can do that by saving multiple BTIP files. They generally save very quickly and the file sizes are quite small. While Beyond Typicals can be very useful in real-time planning, concept development, coordination, and decision-making, it also has some really great rendering capabilities to produce high-quality still images and video of your project. We can get to that menu with this red dot here on the right in the toolbar. I'll remind you, you can save your cameras in this rendering menu. So you can see as I'm moving the camera around and pressing save, we're populating that list. You can also rename your camera if you choose. I'll just say camera 1. And at any time, we can go back and revert to those cameras as they're saved. If you want to delete any cameras, there is a trash can icon here on the right. Next, let's talk output. So when you save your screenshot or recorded video, we can designate an output folder to place those. So I'll go ahead and pull up a folder and I'll create something new on my desktop here that says Project Screenshots. So I can select that folder and you can see that's populated here. If I want to give my output file a name, I can pre-populate that here. Otherwise, it would be named default by default. I'll name this sample image 1. For image quality, you can choose between 1080p, 4K, and 8K as presets. You can see here how the number of pixels are changing in the X and Y direction as you change those presets. Generally, if you're going to print something very large, I'd recommend using 8K for a higher quality image, but the render time and file sizes will increase with that. For brochures and web images, generally 4K or 1080p are plenty suitable, so feel free to play with those settings to your liking. We can look at our aspect ratio for the output file. So when you see I toggle that on, we can see that the black bars on the left and right show what image would be captured. You can manipulate the resolution of your output file by sliding the X and Y number of pixels for your resolution. So if you manually wanted to create an output file that's square, you can set this to a specific number so I can produce a 3000 by 3000 pixel image or video. Keep in mind that if you want to see what your export's going to be, that menu can get in the way, so go ahead and pull that back if you want to see what your resulting image will look like. If we toggle that preview aspect ratio off, you can see those black bars go away, but the resulting image would still produce a square shape. We can change the quality samples per frame slider. By default, your project is probably set to 4 quality samples per frame. What that does is for every frame that's being rendered, it's going to take that many samples and check a bunch of settings like lighting and reflections and anti-aliasing and make sure it's producing the crispest and cleanest sample for that frame. Please keep in mind if you create a very large number of samples, it will take longer to produce your render. I'm going to go ahead and get a still image render of this model. So I'm going to go ahead and take a screenshot. You can see my resolution of 3000 and 3000 will produce a square image. We get that brief status window. And when I open that file location, you can see the resulting image. Please note that the motion blur is not something that is filtered out by that quality sample number. If you want to get rid of any motion blur, I suggest you pause your traffic before you take your photo. You can do that with that traffic play pause button in the bottom right. What this will do is produce a still image that'll give you a much higher quality and cleaner shot without any of that motion blur. We can look at taking screenshots with alpha transparency by toggling this on. What I'm going to do is type in a new folder location, so that will create a new file location for this export. So I will type in with alpha, and I will go ahead and change this file name to sample image. When I press screenshot, what it's going to do is produce 3 different images. It's going to have the entire composite image and then separate out the modeled components with the background. So you can see here we have our full complete image in 4K. And the next file is just the background, then a file with just the modeled elements and a transparent background in a PNG image format. This can be really useful for bringing into Photoshop or placing on a website or in brochures or other marketing materials with a customizable background. You can also record a video of your model. The settings to record a video are down here at the bottom of the rendering menu. You can see we can boost the video length up to 60 seconds. We can change the frame rate of the video from 24, 30, 60, or 120. Keep in mind, the higher the frame rate, the longer the record or the render, but the smoother the picture will be. Generally, a 30 or 60 frame rate is suitable for today's videos. You have a couple of different options for video format. I'll leave it at MP4. And you can also set your MP4 quality from low, standard, high, and very high. Again, keep in mind, the longer the video, the higher quality, the higher the frame rate, the more rendering that will have to be done, and the longer it will take to record a video. I'm going to go ahead and try to create one now. So we'll set our video length at 6 seconds. I'm going to pick a new output folder for this. So I'm going to go ahead and create sample video. Select that folder. We'll give this a file name of existing-proposed. And I'm going to get my camera all set up to where I want to do it. I'm going to take a video that is a top-down view. And I'm also going to use a cool feature for our pro users by displaying autophase and setting an autophase interval to move between the existing and proposed models. I'm also going to add a camera pan so it moves down the corridor as it records the video. So I'm going to go ahead and set up that autophase interval. We'll call it 5 seconds. We'll make sure we're starting on the existing. I'm going to add a downward pan so it moves along the corridor as it records, and I'm going to turn on my traffic so I can record moving traffic with the video. We're going to move that camera back up. Do it this way. You can see it's cycling between those 2 phases. And once I press record, it will go ahead and capture that. So this next screen we get to see the progress of the render. So we have our render preview. We can see where it is in the video. This overall status shows how many frames have been rendered already with an elapsed time and an estimated time remaining. So you see this will take about 3 minutes. Again, if we lowered our quality, lowered the frame rate, this would take a lot less time. If at any point in the render you want to cancel, let's say you got some settings wrong or you see a vehicle you don't like, you can press this button in the bottom right. It usually cancels in a few seconds. We're going to let this play out for the next couple minutes and then I'll show you the final product. I'll use this time to tell you of a few rendering limitations we have in Beyond Typicals. We can't yet create videos with alpha transparency, so you can't cut a video with a transparent background, but perhaps that's a feature we'll be able to add in later versions of the software. Our 2D view also has some rendering limitations. For starters, you are unable to record a video using the 2D view, and you are also unable to use the alpha transparency setting on screenshots of a true 2D view, so you can't create a true 2D image with a transparent background. We suggest a workaround here. You could set your 3D field of view to the lowest setting, which is 5. That can get you to a close representation of a 2D view when you set to the front camera, and that way you can take a screenshot with alpha transparency and get something close with a transparent background. As the render finishes up, we get this message saying it is complete. It has a button to open the file folder to go find your finished product. You can elect to turn this message off, but I like to leave it on as a quick link back to my completed project. So we'll go ahead and open that video file. You can see it is this 6-second clip bouncing from the existing to proposed model. I would recommend that if you want to use more advanced transitions or labeling, that you can pull these videos into some video editing software like the Windows Video Editor or Adobe Premiere, so that you can add some title cards or notes or other labels and transitions to make your videos a really special product. Here's a really quick sample of taking some Beyond Typicals video exports into a free video editing app and adding some notes and transitions to walk through and communicate the staging of a utility repair improvement. So that does it for part 2 of our video tutorial series showing you the basics of how to use Beyond Typicals 2. Join us in our next video where I show you how to build and edit our sections on your way to creating a beautiful 3D rendered typical section for your project.